Alright, what's up, everybody? This is the ToneMeisterCast episode 3 coming at you. I'm going to talk about MMOs today because that's what has been on my mind the past couple days. So, I wouldn't really call myself big on MMOs. I know there are some people that absolutely adore MMOs, that's all that they'll ever play. And I'll keep it real with you. I have mixed emotions about them. And it's a little funny I say it because I do have Fantasy Star Online 2 in the background, which is an MMO of sorts. But that's why I want to talk about it, because I have some thoughts about MMOs that I want to get out there. So, I think MMOs are great on paper. I think the concept of having a whole bunch of players be able to interact with one another through the medium of video games is incredible. It can make for some pretty excellent social hubs, and people can make friends doing this. It's a fun way to make friends if you want to. It's a really good way to experience video games with other people, and I think for that reason, MMOs will always hold a very special spot in gaming. They do something that a lot of games can't do, just due to the nature of how games are typically built. MMOs aim for player interaction for the most part, having so many people just play, just in the same world, all at the same time, coexisting, and you can see each other doing whatever at the same time while you're doing your own stuff. And the game is focused on the multiplayer aspects, hence the name MMO. What was it? Massive Multiplayer Online. So, of course, the whole focus is being able to have multiplayer interactions, is having very large worlds filled with people to interact with. And I think that's awesome, right? I think that's great. And when you think of an MMO, or at least when I think of an MMO, there are a few key ideas that usually come to mind. I usually think of a class system. There's usually defined class systems, almost like a sort of rock, paper, scissor, where you have, in the most general cases, you have a DPS class, right? Just very offensive classes that want to do damage. You have your tank classes, very defensive, the opposite side of a DPS. And then you have your more supportive classes that aim to heal your team or buff your team and do all these things in the background. And then, of course, you have another way to look at it, like a offense as in swords, and then like defense with shields, and then magic, so more like I don't know, like a long range, close range mix or magic kind of thing. When you think of an MMO, you usually got a wide variety of things happening, different classes that kind of say what this character does. And I like this concept. I do like the idea of being able to form teams with varying classes that each do their own thing to help benefit your other team members. It's a great idea. And really, I have a lot of praise for MMOs. A lot of what MMOs aim to do is really cool. I do enjoy all the ideas these things put out there. Having this massive world filled with story and its own lore, and like all these customization options and all these classes and all these people you can interact with. Awesome. But of course, there's a lot more nuance. So, my biggest gripe with MMOs is actually almost like the very thing that I like about MMOs. I hate multiplayer interaction, but I love multiplayer interaction. And it's pretty complicated in my head. Because on one hand, I love being able to interact with other people and see other people in the same world and be, if I wanted to be able to talk to them or do whatever. Now, where the problem usually comes with it for me is when I want to play the game, but I don't have anyone to be on a team with, and then, of course, that hinders how you can play the game because you can't do harder quests. Now, every MMO is shaped differently, of course, and that's one of the bigger reasons I'm really into Phantasy Star Online 2 as opposed to something like Final Fantasy 14. In PSO2, you can play the game on your own and enjoy everything about it without ever interacting with another player, and you have access to all the classes that you want to play. You have access to playing a game however you want. And I love being able to just run around in this world, know that there's probably like a couple hundred other people at all times surrounding me that I might not see, but I know that they're there, especially during bigger events such as emergency quests where I can run around and see them there with me fighting a big boss. Or if I'm in the hub area, I know I can look around and see it populated with dozens of other people. Though I play on lower settings, I can still see see the player models. And I enjoy that aspect of feeling like I'm in this very alive world. And another big thing I'm a sucker for is character customization. I think being able to express yourself in a video game is so cool. I think that is really fun to do. So, of course, one of the biggest things I do in PSO2 is I love changing how my character looks, getting new cosmetics and just wearing different things all the time. Some of the background footage I've had for these videos, I've had my character wearing cast parts, which is basically a term for robots in the Phantasy Star Online universe. I also have my character just look like a normal dude, or I have him wearing these really interesting accessories and interesting layered cosmetics. And that it's a perfect thing for MMOs, right? In MMOs, it's all about player experience with other players. It's the interaction you have between people and players and just being able to express yourself in this game world along with everybody else. No two characters are exactly the same because they all have a personal touch done by the player. And some games might not have great customization and it can feel like the world's filled with very samey characters. But in something like PSO2, everybody looks entirely unique from one another due to the hundreds of different cosmetics, especially if you are playing New Genesis and had a character from the original PSO2, and that carried over all of your cosmetics from there. So the game is filled with customization, and this is one of the aspects I love about MMOs. And I think it's great, right? I think that's great. I love that. I love being able to interact with people. Like I said, my biggest gripe is just I don't want to always have to play with other people. Or rather, I don't want to rely on other people. And that's kind of a problem I see with a lot of MMOs. And people that I know and have talked with kind of agree that the reason they don't really get into MMOs is because they don't have other people to play with. They don't have other people who want to dedicate time to it. They don't know how long they would actually dedicate to playing to the game and having fun with it. So MMOs do stand out for specific people for that very reason of, oh, I can play with a bunch of dedicated friends and it'll be great, or I can start playing and I can meet people in the game who are dedicated and I can play with them and this and that and this and that. But for someone like me who enjoys playing a lot of different games all at the same time and not really committing to any games, I personally find it to be a gripe. I'm not huge on relying on other players. I think that, there is value to making quests balanced around multiplayer, and that is a big thing that stands out in these MMOs, is being able to play missions that make you have to play with other players. And I don't mean that like it's a terrible thing to have to rely on other players in the game, because if it's balanced around it and you can easily do it, then it's not really a problem. But nonetheless, when I'm trying a game out and I'm having fun with it, and then all of a sudden I hit this brick wall, where if I can't get another player to help me do this, I can't play it any farther. I usually just put the game down because I don't want to do that. I'm not like, I'm not, for lack of better terms, I'm not like a social person in gaming, which is a very weird thing to say. But when it comes to MMOs, it kind of makes sense. If you don't want to socialize with people, then MMOs might not be the game for you. But at the same time, MMOs hold very special gameplay. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. MMOs hold very special and unique gameplay compared to a lot of other games. A lot of other games don't give you a really heavy emphasis on player expression or a really heavy emphasis on character customization. A lot of other games don't give you crazy amounts of variety in the classes you can play, in the customization in general. And that's what I love the most about MMOs, is being able to have a character that's extremely unique, and I can show it off to a bunch of other people, and it's great. For example, bringing up PSO2 again, I have not played in a party with other people in New Genesis. I used to be on a team in the original PSO2, and it was fun interacting with people. But what I love about the game is it doesn't force you to rely on other players. You can play through the entire game solo for the story, for a lot of the quests and submissions and everything. Where it forces you to need more players is in the very difficult quests. And that usually comes in the form of the game's equivalent to raids, or they usually call them emergency quests, where you can have about 12 players join together to fight a very powerful boss. And I love that you can play the game solo or entirely in multiplayer if you want, and then get to this later content and very easily partner with other people. You don't have to search for anybody to be in a party with. Oh, excuse me. You don't have to go looking for anybody. You don't have to socialize with anyone. It will automatically matchmake you with a bunch of other people doing the same quest, and you can just go take down the enemy. And that is what I have seen as a little bit of a problem in other games, is they either make a whole lot of the content completely depend on having multiple players with you, or they don't have a way to matchmake with more players very easily. So people who don't want to look for more players are just kind of gonna throw the game away. And, the market for MMOs is huge, don't get me wrong. But I feel like the games that work out the best are the ones that let you play on your own without really forcing you to need more players. Now, I think that's great when a game can handle one player versus something like 12. Scaling enemies up. I think it's a great design philosophy to say this game is an MMO, but we're not going to force you to interact with anyone else. It's a big part of the game. We're going to focus a lot on the potential for interacting with people. Everything's going to be done through the eyes of having a lot of people all around. But we can either just scale everything up when there's more players around, or I don't know. But MMOs are very interesting, and the whole relying on other players, I'd say it's a bit of a nuanced gripe for me, because even when it comes down to that, there are some games I've played where I might have some friends who enjoy the game, but they end up playing either like the same class or similar classes, and you run into the same problem or similar problem of, well, I do have other people to play with, but they can't help me with this. If you get to like a late game thing, and you have a friend who also is at that point, but they have something that can't benefit you. Well, too bad. You're going to have to go find someone else that has the skills you need for it. And I guess the best way to say is that this multiplayer type of balancing is a double-edged sword, right? It's awesome to hold on, I'm looking for the word, searching in my brain. One moment, scanning, analyzing, developing word. Oh boy, I'm not getting it. Found it. So I think it's amazing to incentivize players to interact with one another. I think it's amazing to have players play with one another and to be able to do things together and benefit one another. And the double-edged sword part of it is coming when you say, well, I want to do this, but I can't because I need to rely on other people and I can't find anyone else for it. So even though you might want to do this quest that looks really cool, you just can't do it yet because you need other people to help you. And of course, you get into the more micro problems of, well, I have people who could play it, but we don't have a good balance of our composition, so we still can't do it yet because we need other people. I have to find someone else who can do this with me. So that's really my biggest gripe with MMOs, is I usually love gameplay in MMOs. Of course, it depends. Every game is different. They all have different gameplay. But I typically love the ideas present in MMOs, the gameplay, everything about it. But I also hate if you're forced to rely on other players and it's very difficult to do that. But of course, there are also some incredible things that come out of MMOs, and I've kind of said a lot of what I think is most incredible about it. And that's namely your freedom of expression. You can make characters that are almost like an extension of yourself. If you feel like having a really cool looking character, you can do it. If you feel like having a goofy looking character, you can do it. All these things. But I want to kind of transition out of what I was just talking about and look at another aspect of MMOs, and that's kind of the almost like the business model behind them. Because I think that's a big thing as well that plays into MMOs, is they typically have a different style of business models. So when you think of an MMO, do you usually think about paying for the game or just downloading it and playing it? I think of the latter. Usually when you think of an MMO, it's a free-to-play. Oh, well, here's this free-to-play game. Big world, you can interact with a bunch of people. And what comes at the expense of it being free-to-play? Well, they're going to say, alright, well, if you want any good cosmetics, or if you want good equipment, or if you want to do anything actually interesting in the game, you need to pay for it. And I feel like a lot of games that are free-to-play fall under this same exact problem. If you want anything interesting, you have to pay. I can think of a couple games, right? Well, let's even look at mainstream games that have gotten popular that are free-to-play. If we say something like Fortnite, you can play the game and have access to the gameplay and everything, and it's fine. But if you want an interesting experience and you want to express yourself as a player, you need to pay for it. You have to either buy the battle pass or buy V-Bucks for whatever. And, I think the model's good, don't get me wrong. Because you do get to play the game for free. So you're not forced into it, and they still do give you some free stuff every now and then. So it's not like I'm saying this model is horrible. It's just that it's a common thing you'll see. And that's not even an MMO, is the funny part. That's just an example of how it might happen. If we even look at PSO2, if you want, on a surface level, if you want anything to deck your character out, you need to pay for it. But what I think is incredible about PSO that I haven't really seen in other games before, or maybe because I don't play a lot of MMOs, is that there's an entire player market, and you can just buy items that people put up there. So someone can pay money to get cosmetics, say, I already have one of those, and then they put it up on the market for a free-to-play to potentially get. I haven't really seen that in another game before. This entire player market where anybody can buy anything off of one another. Well, not anything. There are some limits, very few, but where players can buy things without having to spend money. For instance, I have not spent a single cent on Phantasy Star Online 2. And now this podcast is turning into me sucking off this game's dick, but bear with me. I have not spent a single penny on the game. Yet I have probably upwards to hundreds of cosmetics that I've gotten throughout, either through free events or just playing the game, building up in-game currency, and buying it on this market. I don't need to spend money, and I can still make my character look great. And I feel like that is a problem that some of these MMOs can run across, is they want people to spend their money and people to play their game, but they don't let people who don't spend money enjoy the game the same way as everyone else. And that's kind of one of my gripes. I would love to play a wide variety of MMOs, but I have such little options to making my character stand out that maybe I don't really want to play it anymore, because that is a big aspect for me, is that character customization. I thoroughly enjoy customizing characters. So, again, I don't think these business models are horrible. It's definitely a lot better than saying you have to pay for content added to the game. I would much rather have a free-to-play game that lets you enjoy all of the gameplay and have to pay for cosmetics than a free-to-play game that makes you have to buy expansion passes. So it's not even like a big issue. It's just something I've seen that might deter me from playing MMOs. It's stacked on top of other things, of course. But I think going along with this whole free-to-play train of thought, a lot of MMOs might be held back from this idea. There might be these developers who create a free-to-play MMO and realize they can't sustain doing it if they don't have the numbers to back it up. Or because they're making it free-to-play, they put less money into the game, and you end up with a very janky product at finish. And then they still want to sell you cosmetics in hopes of making enough money to potentially fix the game or just add more cosmetics. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword. And I'm, again, not really big into the MMO scene. So I'm not sure of MMOs you need to buy. But the one MMO I can think of, and I did mention it earlier, is Final Fantasy XIV. I'm pretty sure it's 14. I could be wrong. If I am, I apologize. But Final Fantasy XIV, you do have to pay to play the game. You have to pay a subscription-based service in order to play it. And I haven't actually looked at the business model itself. I don't know if it's monthly. I don't know if it's bi-monthly. I don't know if it's yearly. Whatever it is. And my only experience with the game has been watching little videos of it and playing, I believe it was a free week on PlayStation, where when you can download the game initially and play it for about a week, and then they lock you out of the account unless you pay. I thought the game was awesome. It was very fun to play. I had a lot of fun. It looked like there was so much depth and all of these interesting mechanics. But I was not ready to shell the money out for it because, I play so many different games all at once, I don't know how long I'd actually play the game for, which also goes into the thing of I would be playing on my own, and that seems like a game you definitely need more players for. But to loop it back around, what's interesting is, from what I've seen on the game, it really pays off that they force you to pay to play the game, right? You have to buy in to play it. And I think you can see that money. I've heard nothing but good things about the game. It seems to always be running really well. They add lots of new and very big content drops from what I've seen. And it's kind of like it's telling. They're making more money from you paying to own the game, and they're able to do more with it. So, I think MMOs at the moment are in a very weird state. You're either Final Fantasy XIV and maybe some others you pay for, or you are like every other MMO that's completely free to play and reliant on people buying your cosmetics. And in the world of free to play games, do you think people are going to rather play the MMO for free or the next Battle Royale Fortnite? I don't know, right? I think MMOs are a niche enough genre to say that it would be weird to make them buy in to play, but it also is a little hard for them to remain free to play sometimes, depending on the company, depending on their business model, depending on the game. So it is a very nuanced discussion, I think, about MMOs. I've seen a video probably earlier this year, maybe a year ago, I'm not too sure when, about somebody actually talking about the state of MMOs in their eyes, and they find that MMOs are in such a very weird place right now. And I definitely agree with a lot of what they had to say. Even though I can't remember too much now, I did agree with them. MMOs are niche enough that a lot of mainstream gamers don't really know anything about them, but also popular enough that they take up a huge market in gaming. It's this weird, fine balance, right? And one of the problems, or one of the things I've noticed with MMOs in the current age, is that they have so much potential to be so much more. I have seen countless MMOs coming out. Well, I shouldn't really say countless, but I've seen MMOs. I have seen the ideas that they present, and they just fall flat usually, and are just forgettable, right? These games try to come out using the MMO formula, and they just kind of flop because they're not doing anything inherently unique or special or different, and they just fail on all accounts because they're boring. I feel like MMOs are an untapped well of potential. They have so much that can potentially be done with them, yet also so much that aren't being done with them. I just said the same thing twice. That's how perplexed I am on MMOs. You see, the market, people I feel nowadays, especially with the whole lockdown from quarantining and COVID and everything, people want multiplayer games. It's been like this, a very common trend for years and years, this big push for multiplayer games. And MMOs are the epitome of multiplayer games. They are the multiplayer games. And that's why it shocks me that they almost seem niche in a sense. They come off as a niche genre, even though everybody wants multiplayer. And I think it's because no one's been able to quite capture the... I'm trying to think of how I want to say this properly. No one has captured the true spectacle of an MMO and been able to match it with the more mainstream, typical genres that people have come to expect. Right? The MMOs in general have not been able to really capture mainstream audiences because they're not entirely friendly to newer players. And I think that does come back around to the idea that if you force your players to rely on needing more people to play your game, people won't want to play it. So when it comes to making an MMO, I feel like there is this huge potential for it still. That I think, funny enough, I think that PSO, or I guess Sega, because they're the ones making it, that Sega has been trying to tap into, is creating an MMO that lets you play it however you want, whenever you want, on your own. And I think there has been a push in recent years with gaming for games to have multiplayer and allow you to play the game solo while giving multiplayer as a nice option, while still giving it being a nice option without that option feeling lackluster. Right? Without the game feeling like multiplayer is just an add-on, but to say multiplayer is a well thought out idea that you can do with other people. And to have incentives to play multiplayer. For instance, more XP when you play with other people in your party. More like higher drop rates with more people. Or just being able to do things faster. And I think there is still so much that can be done for MMOs in the future that companies might start be looking into now. And they're trying, I think we're seeing companies trying to develop the right formula between MMO and single player games. It definitely feels like that to me. That gaming has been taking a turn to trying to make larger games that have larger focuses on multiplayer while also allowing the player to just play it on their own. Which I think is a really cool thing. So, yeah, that's kind of what I think about MMOs. Off the top of my head, at least right now. That's mainly been what I've been thinking about, is how can MMOs adapt and change and strive into a more mainstream audience, but also keeping the identity of being an MMO. And what makes an MMO an MMO? Why do people like MMOs? What do I think makes them interesting? And I think it's a difficult discussion when you really, really get into it. Because there's not really one right answer. And that's a special thing about MMOs, is there's never one right answer. You will always have an infinite amount of ideas you can use with an MMO. I feel like we've seen it attempted recently with something like The Division, which isn't... It's like half trying to be an MMO, but also... Oh, excuse me, again. The Division comes off to me as an attempt to be an MMO without being an MMO. And we've kind of been just seeing those ideas spark up a little bit more, where I think The Division had a good idea, a good concept, that they weren't able to really execute properly. Now, honestly, I played that game, I thought it was fun, right? It was a fun time, for a little bit, but that's just me. I know that It's very like you either like that game or you hate it kind of thing usually. But I feel like it had a good idea that they didn't execute very well. I forget what the term was, like the dark zone or something. Was such an interesting idea to be able to have, to be able to access the game and make it entirely multiplayer, and you can just run across people and fight them and do whatever you want inside the boundaries of this place. And I feel like if they really expanded on that idea more and made like more of like just a large map around the idea of that, they would have had something really cool. And I think potentially the future of MMOs could look something like The Division, except hmm, except better. Right, taking that idea of being able to play the game on your own, but also giving complete potential for multiplayer aspects. I think being able to blend solo and multiplayer together is such an important thing. Uh, Another example, not the best example, not the best executed, but an example from PSO2, New Genesis, is they have gigantic enemies. Now, what's interesting about these enemies is you can only fight them at max level right now. You can only do damage to them at max level, and their power scaling is dependent on how many areas or how many players are in the area. And I think in these areas you can fight them in, you can have about 32 players in at one time. They only spawn in thunderstorms and are very powerful. You could just be doing your own thing in that area, grinding for XP, grinding for material, doing whatever you want, when all of a sudden a thunderstorm hits and you see this massive glowing enemy show up, threatening to one-shot and two-shot you. And I think that, if executed better, could be a really good idea. And I think more games might include stuff like that in the future. Where, I mean, I don't really know a lot of MMOs to begin with, so maybe this is an idea that's used already. I could just be ignorant to that. I'll admit it. I could be ignorant to the fact that it might exist better already. But I think more games in the future that want a multiplayer focus or want more of an emphasis with multiplayer on the side might include events that incentivize lots of players to join in, where you can fight these gigantic enemies on your own, but it will take you a very long time for one because their HP pool is massive, and it will be very easy to fail the encounter because they can one or two shot you. And it's a bit limiting because you have to be max level to even face the thing, where if you're a low level and you find it, you can't do anything. But that the more players you have, even though it does scale up with its HP, it will also just be an easier fight because then people can revive you, people can buff you, give you heals, all this, that. And I think moving forward in the gaming industry for games with a heavy multiplayer emphasis like MMOs, it would be beneficial to be able to say you can play this game solo, but for a lot of the harder content, you have this very large emphasis on needing more players. I think that might be the way to go. I don't know. Because I still think, even what there is now, there is something to that I don't really want to see go away. To have games that entirely incentivize you to play multiplayer from the beginning. I think there is still something to that a lot of players would enjoy because it's not seen in other games, relying on having team members. And again, what makes MMOs special is being able to interact with other people. And one obvious way to incentivize this is to say you need to play with more people if you even want a chance at beating the content with any form of ease. So, it's just a weird it's weird to me. Because on one hand, I think it's really cool to say, yeah, you need to have a party of people to play this game well, and to incentivize players to really interact and, give the MMO the identity of an MMO, to be seeing people talking in the public chats, trying to find other people to help them, people trying to talk in the public chats to strategize things, or talking as a big team in an area, trying to recruit people. And you definitely would lose some of that aspect if you focus the game to be allowed to be played on single player, while having multiplayer is just a nice big emphasis on the side. So I think it can go either way, and I think maybe the solution might just be make all of it. Have MMOs that can let you play solo, that don't have as big of an emphasis on the multiplayer, right? That do have these big worlds filled with players, but not forcing you to have to play with other people, and make games that do have that really large emphasis, right? Why not have all of it? So, MMOs, cool. I like them. I think they're really fun. I think they're interesting. I think a lot of really interesting ideas are in MMOs, and I feel like we're starting to see maybe a little more of those ideas come out into more popular games now. But that's about all I have on my mind right now. I've been going for about 42-ish minutes at the moment. So I'm going to call it quits because I've exhausted my brain. And if I keep going, I'm going to repeat myself more and more. So thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you are a saint, and I will give you a kiss on the mouth. Alright. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Goodbye.